What's up, YouTube? It's Aerith here, your favorite dragon. I'm here today to share with you my thoughts on the season 3 meta and to kind of put together a little bit of a tier list. I'm just going to be ripping this live. I don't have like a massive amount of information to share about each class. I just wanted to kind of go over the general things about each class that I think make them strong, that make them weak, and the ways that I feel they might interface with the dungeons in this upcoming season of Mythic Plus, and then try to cultivate a sort of tier list to help you with your decision making process when it comes to selecting a main. So, without further ado, I'd like to just go ahead and jump straight into it. So first things first, I want to talk about preservation. Preservation is absolutely my favorite spec out of the lot. I think it's no surprise. We've been in a little bit of a bad place for the last stretch. I wouldn't say necessarily bad. We're just been outshined by Holy Paladin. Um, Augmentation's been in the picture, and that has made it a lot harder to want to bring both an aug and a preservation evoker. That said, a preservation evoker doesn't really lose out too much if aug does find its way into the season 3 meta. This is because a lot of the utility that evoker in general brings is highly stackable. One thing that's very true about this upcoming season is that there's a lot of stops. There's a lot of kicks. We have a great kick. It is on a long cooldown, but we do have a kick that is very versatile that we can use from virtually anywhere. And it's a range kick, which is something that is highly useful in a lot of context. We also have a lot of stops. We have three unique AOE stops, one of which can be spec down to 45 seconds. So we can have a 45-second knockup, a minute 30 on a push forward, and an AOE stun all in our kit. This is incredibly powerful, and having two specs that like both have lots and lots of AOE stops is still something that's really, really good. Let's talk really briefly about the throughput. So our tier set is very unique and that it gives us quite a lot of damage. And for that reason, I would say that we are going to be probably the highest damage dealing spec in the game, with the exception of perhaps Disc Priest, if something that scales very well with PI happens to be involved. That said, even like in considering PI as a part of the Disc Priest kit, we still just do an absolutely crazy amount of damage thanks to our two set. I'm gonna go ahead and throw Evoker in the S tier. It's one of two specs that I think really stand out a cut above the rest. I think it's just a great all around healer. We have a lot of great burst healing. We have a lot of great healing into rot damage. We just honestly have the most healing throughput in general of all the specs that I spent a lot of time testing. So this will be my first S tier spec. I think it's very well deserved. That said, the difference between the S tier and the A tier, in my mind, is not super substantial. But we'll talk more on that as we get into other specs. The next spec that I wanted to talk a little bit about is Dispriest. So Dispriest is another spec that I would immediately just want to put into the S tier. We did just see some last minute nerfs to Dispriest, and it's hard to really say exactly how that's going to shake out. That said, Dispriest does a lot of damage. They bring power infusion, which is just something that has been absolutely crazy useful. They have insane utility in the form of Mind Sooth and an AoE fear. That said, they do not have a kick, and alongside some compared to something like Preservation or even Resto Shaman, the AoE stop is like pretty mediocre. You have to be in melee. Not everything can really be feared. So it is like a little bit I'd say behind Preservation just because it lacks that utility. Again, there are a lot of AoE stops that are going to be prevalent in this upcoming season, and also kicks are great. I mean, there's some packs of mobs that require like 7 kicks. It's like actually crazy. Um, and yeah, for that reason, I think it is a little bit worse than Preservation, but still stands out a cut above the rest just because of its overall healing throughput, which is actually very high, and the fact that it brings again power infusion and mind soothe, which remain to be quite powerful. There actually are a few moments where Mass Dispel will be quite clutch, namely in the new underwater dungeon, which the name of it is currently lost to me. I believe the third boss does a dot and then does another dot and then does a dot and another dot. Every other healer in the game is only going to be able to spell every other dot, which means that you'll have to heal through one. Dispriest does have the advantage of having that mass dispel so that they can just simply remove one. And now let's talk about the A tier. So I do have two specs in the A tier, and I'll just go ahead and throw them both in there right now. First, let's talk about Restoration Druid before actually we get into Holy Paladin, which will be our other A tier spec. So Restoration Druid is looking very strong. Their healing throughput is just absolutely nutty. I mean, they just have gobs and gobs and gobs of healing. in this upcoming tier. I never felt as if I was like wanting for like more healing in any of my testing. It just felt like I had plenty and even more than I actually needed. The treants do just an absolutely bonkers amount of healing when you summon them, and that short cooldown is just something that is overwhelmingly powerful. The one major drawback of Resto Druid is that its damage was lacking quite a lot. That said, we did just get a last minute buff to all of its cat form damage. Some of those buffs are quite substantial. It's unclear exactly how this will shake out because, like, currently all of their cat form abilities just do almost absolutely nothing, and like virtually all of your damage is coming from your dots, from your Moonfire, from your Sunfire. Um, that said, it's not nothing, and it's definitely something that will move the needle, possibly in a very big way. Again, I don't think there's a huge difference between the S tier and the A tier. And it is very possible that our tier list could look something like this, because these specs are all very, very, very close together. I think I will actually leave them like this for the time being. Um, yeah, Resto Druid's only main drawback is that its kick is not super great. That said, it does have two AoE stops, which are both very potent. One of which is a 30-second cooldown in incapacitating roar. I think Resto Druid is a great pick, and it's definitely well positioned moving into season 3. So let's talk about our next A tier spec, Holy Paladin. Holy Paladin has been the absolute king of Mythic Plus, just historically, like dating back as far as Mythic Plus dates back. It's just always been a juggernaut. And last season, we saw that come to an absolute head. I mean, I think Paladin was in the best place that it's maybe ever been. I think it's in the best place that a healer itself has ever been at the release of 10.1.5. We have had something to the tune of 7 nerfs to Holy Paladin since then, and the nerfs have just kept coming in and coming in and coming in. Meanwhile, other classes have seen, a lot of other things like, for instance, the preservation tier set, which is going to make them substantially stronger next season. Holy's actually losing a pretty good tier set and moving into a kind of mediocre tier set. So I think the Holy Paladin has definitely fallen off just a little bit. That said, it is still Holy Paladin. The utility is still second to none. They have a single target stun, which is powerful. They have an AoE stop, which is powerful. They have decent passive damage, which has been nerfed quite a lot. They still have decent healing. It's definitely not as good as I would say these three specs. Its healing throughput, its damage throughput have definitely fallen behind. And that is why I think that it is slightly worse than all three of these specs. That said, if you can make it work, that utility might be something that a lot of parties are highly interested in. Diva Aura remains to be one of the most broken buffs in the game. And for that reason, we are going to be leaving Paladin in the A tier, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see some top teams attempting to run it. That said, I do think that these other three options do look more attractive, and I do think that Preservation and Disc Priest seem to be currently the most attractive healers. But we'll get more into a little about that. We'll get more into that in just a moment when I kind of get to the kind of whole point of this video. Um, More on that in just a moment. So let's talk about Holy Priest. Holy Priest is going to be our first B tier spec. Holy Priest is kind of just fine. It does the job. Its healing throughput is quite good. Its damage is pretty decent. Where it lacks a lot is its utility, and it kind of pales a lot in comparison to Disc Priest. Disc Priest, of course, has an AoE DR ability, which can prevent one shots. That is quite potent. Holy Priest just doesn't have that. Disc Priest has two charges of Pain Sup. Holy Priest just has GS, which is a very, very, very it's a significantly worse version of Pain Sup. It's completely different. They're not really comparable, but you'd rather have Pain Sup at the end of the day. You'd rather just have flat DR to give to someone if you have that option. That said, if you do love Holy Priest, it's definitely a spec that you can make things work with. If you're playing with friends, if you're playing with people who just don't really care what you play, Holy Priest can definitely get the job done. You are, of course, susceptible in a way that none of these healers here are to movement. So there's often all there's oftentimes these moments where there's lots of damage going out, and at the same time, the game asks you to run away from swirlies the whole time that damage is happening. We're gonna see this a lot in the Everbloom in the mage boss. There's a lot of heavy damage that's happening while you need to move. You will be able to stack your holy words and like dump out all your holy words into each of these damage events that ask you to move. That said, like there's just gonna be times where you're kind of caught with your pants down, where you feel really awkward, like having to plant in place just to be able to cast. And for this reason, Holy Priest is just a cut below the rest. I'm just gonna throw Mistweaver in the B tier. It's a decent healer. It's probably a bit ahead of Holy Priest. Its healing throughput is going to be very powerful. Its damage is pretty decent. It doesn't really have an external, which is a problem that has been around for quite a while. And a lot of its utility is well, while quite decent, maybe not on the level of some of the other healers. That said, it's still a strong pick. I think that you can definitely do some of the highest keys on Mistweaver. And it's not substantially far behind like all of the healers in our A tier. So it's just a solid top of the B tier sort of situation. Up next, we have the only healer that I'm going to put in C tier, and that is Resto Shaman. Resto Shaman just has a lot of problems that need to be addressed. They don't really have any burst healing. A lot of their healing comes at the end of like a very lengthy cast, and that's just something that doesn't really lend itself very well to Mythic Plus. You have a lot of arduous cast times. I mean, you want to keep healing rain down. It's a 2-second cast time. When someone's like really in trouble, you're just spamming a lot of healing that just comes at the end of this super long, cast time. That said, Resto Shaman is still perfectly capable of getting the job done. Spirit Link remains to be a very powerful ability. Ancestral Vigor remains to be an incredibly powerful talent. In terms of just like the raw like utility. So it's not a spec that you can necessarily count out. I just wouldn't really consider it something that I would want to play this season or something I would recommend to anyone else to play because just some of the other options are just head and shoulders quite above that. So this is like ultimately what I would put my tier list looking like. Again, you could like leave it like this depending on how close you think S and A tier are. That said, all of these specs are very, very good. I mean, I could even see a world where it's like this, but I mean, it's hard to move Paladin out of the A tier ever. But yeah, this is kind of I think what I would finally settle on. Something to the tune of this. That said, I did want to talk about a very important concept and something that is going to be more than ever maybe important in this upcoming season. So one thing that we saw at the beginning of season 2 and throughout most of season 1 is that there was actually pretty good healer diversity. I expect that moving into this next season, healer diversity will be again at like record highs. Dragonflight has been very good besides 10.1.5 at keeping healers relatively balanced. In a world where healers are relatively close together and where you can actually put the top 4 healers like within, a fraction of a standard deviation next to one another, you stop thinking about what is the best healer to bring and you start thinking about what is the best healer to complement my group. And when you start thinking in this way, pretty much all of these healers do have a home in some way. There is a world where a Mistweaver healer makes more sense to bring to a specific comp than any of these other healers. There is a world where preservation is just head and shoulders the best pick for your group. There's a world where Disc Priest is just head and shoulders the best pick for your group. Where Resto Druid is just the best pick for your group. And the use cases for all of these healers are going to vary quite a lot. So let's get into a little bit of why you might take each of these healers. So I think the easiest one to get into is obviously preservation. The main use case for preservation is you need a lust. If you need a lust, then preservation is by far and away the best healer. That said, preservation does have the strongest damage throughput, the strongest healing throughput, and some of the best utility available to a healer. And so for these reasons, it's also just a generically like very good healer to take regardless of the comp. That said, the primary use case for preservation is, hey, we need a lust in our party because we're playing like double rogue, havoc or like havoc boomkin rogue. Um, and we just don't have access to a lust with our current team comp. If that's the case, like you will always take preservation because you need a lust and it's a lot better than Resto Shaman in this upcoming season. So that is, I would say, the primary use case for Preservation Evoker. The primary use case for Restoration Druid is that you simply want that versatility buff. All things being equal, the group already has, a lot of good buffs. The group already has a lust. The group already has like all the things it needs. But let's say you're missing either a druid, you don't have a boomkin, and you're missing a battle res. You don't have anyone who can battle res. That's when Resto Druid starts to become incredibly, incredibly attractive. If you don't have a battle res in your group and you don't have a Mark of the Wild in your group, Resto Druid is going to look a lot better than just taking a Preservation Evoker because you really want that battle res, right? And so in this sort of situation, like in a meta where like all the DPS, like, oh, hey, they don't have a battle res. hey, none of them are are a druid. The tank is not a druid. Well, Resto Druid is going to look really, really good in this sort of meta. And so for this reason, like Resto Druid has just as strong of a use case as any of these others. Um, Holy Paladin's in a similar boat. If you're lacking a battle res, Holy Paladin could very well be the healer that you want to bring. It has a little bit less damage, has a little bit less healing throughput, but its utility is also something that is really, really, really potent. So in a world where it doesn't really matter, like that you just heal a little bit less than everybody else because the content is like easy enough to heal and you need a battle res, in this sort of world, having the 3% DR buff is really, really powerful. Having access to things like Hodge, the AoE stop, all of this powerful utility that Paladin brings, freedom, bop, do two immunities, its own immunity plus bop, like giving someone else an immunity. Having all of these things, it can just be insanely, insanely powerful. And so the use case for Holy Paladin is of course that you want all that utility. You need the battle res, and you really want that 3% DR. It's a great buff. It's a really, really great buff. The use case for disc, I think, looks something like we feel like we are pretty good on stops. We feel like we're pretty good on kicks. We have this person in our party who scales insanely well with PI on a 2-minute cooldown. Um, and we also really want the DR because there's a lot of like potential one shots. And in this sort of situation, the disc priest healer does seem to gain a lot of headway. So I think that at the end of the day, all four of these healers have a really, really powerful, a really, really potent use case. And it's not really going to be so much about like which of the healers is the best, so much as which of the healers fits my group comp the best. Just I did mention briefly that there was a use case for Mistweaver. Mistweaver starts to become very, very attractive in a world where you already have a lust, in a world where you already have a battle res, but you simply need really, really you have a full physical damage comp, and you really, really want to buff that full physical damage comp with the Mistweaver's debuff, which is nothing to be scoffed at. It's quite a lot of damage by the time you get to the end of a key. And in a world where the comp is fully physical, the Mistweaver's damage plus that 5% that they're giving to physical damage to everyone else can be quite a lot of damage, and it can be very potent. So at the end of the day, I would say that all of these healers are looking pretty decent. Healer balance is looking great going into season 3. And I think that we're entering into a brave new world where we're not really taking just the best healer because they are the best healer, but we're taking the healer that fits our group comp the best. That said, I do think that Preservation and Disc Priest will be standing just a little bit ahead of everybody else. There's slightly more equal, offer slightly more. After the recent buffs, it could be that we also put Resto Druid in this same tier. It's really hard to say. All of these healers though, they do have a great use case. Yeah, I hope you guys have found this quick little rapid fire tier list to be helpful. I just wanted to get my opinion out there. A lot of people have been asking me to make a tier list. I am losing my voice. I've been streaming a lot over the last couple of days and talking way, way, way too much. That said, I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure that you like and comment. Let me know what you think the best healer is for going into season 3. What healer are you planning to main? And what healers are you considering maining? I'd love to help you with your decision. Also, make sure you're following me on Twitch at twitch.tv/eyelashtv. That said, I love you guys, and I will see you next time. I don't know why I'm saluting. I'm not a soldier or something. Bye, everybody.